Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm really excited to have Sean Kernan, the principal of 360 Wealth Management, an LPL-powered platform that helps advisors transition from pure commission businesses to a hybrid model. He's also the host of How to Go Independent, a podcast focused on making the leap from commissions to independence. I wanted to have Sean on the show because for advisors out there in primarily commission-based businesses, making the leap to fee-only can be daunting. It involves leaving your current firm, losing a lot of clients that probably aren't a good fit for your new fee-only service offering, and basically starting over revenue-wise. Sean and I had a great conversation about each step of the process that you have to go through as an advisor to go from commission-based to fee-only. I learned a lot as we talked to the various steps, and for any advisors that are in these transition phases, this will be really helpful for you. If you'd like more time to spend with your clients, First Ascent Asset Management can help. First Ascent builds and manages investment portfolios for independent financial advisors and their clients for a flat fee of $500 per account. This industry-first approach to pricing makes professional investment management affordable for everyone without sacrificing quality. First Ascent's 7-member investment committee includes 5 CFAs, a PhD, and a CFP who collectively bring decades of experience, objectivity, and fresh perspectives. First Ascent offers a variety of portfolios designed to produce solid long-term performance while keeping internal expenses and trading costs low. First Ascent's high-touch service team stands with you as a resource to provide guidance and to make account opening and servicing the accounts easy and hassle-free. They also offer a streamlined technology platform to facilitate proposal generation and paperless account opening. Visit their website at firstascentam.com or give them a call at 720-465-7888. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/93. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. You can find a discount code to attend XYPN 17 in August, a can't-miss event with over 500 advisors expected to attend this year. Early bird pricing ends at the end of March, so get your ticket today. Without further ado, here's my interview with Sean. Hey, Sean, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for being on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Alan.
So I'm really excited for today's topic because you are an expert in sort of transitioning from the broker-dealer world into the RIA world, which is a world that sort of a transition that I am not all that familiar with. So it's always fun to have folks on to talk about it and be able to help educate advisors, especially many of our listeners, which are currently inside of a broker-dealer and looking to break away. And so to sort of lay the groundwork for how you sort of gain this expertise, take a step back and talk a little bit about your sort of career path. So have you always been a financial advisor, or is it something you got into as a later career choice?
Sure. To some degree, it's a combination of both. I started in the industry when I was 26, about 15 years ago. It was, from my perspective, it was really my first career choice, but before that, I was an Army officer. So I went to West Point and graduated in 97 and had a 5-year service commitment. So one reason I decided to go there was that I knew I'd have a job when I graduated and have 5 years to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I used that time to talk to other people and kind of survey what was out there. And I'd always had a passion for personal finance, and I was fairly good at numbers and such. And so I got it down to either go to business school, get an MBA, and be an investment management type guy, or maybe a corporate manager type, or do this. And so this appealed to me because I could do the numbers as well as have the personal connections that are so amazing in this business. And so I started with Edward Jones way back in 2002, knocking on doors, heat of Texas summer, which is always fun. Some people will offer you water, which is great. There are definitely days when I wondered, man, I went through all the West Point and serving in the Army for 5 years to do this. This is not the most fun thing, but it worked. It worked well enough to give me a kind of a foothold. And so, that's kind of how I got in industry. And I spent my first 3 years at Edward Jones and kind of learning the basics of the business, I suppose.
So, thankfully, I think most companies, I'm not sure if Edward Jones has made the transition, but I think most are moving away from the knocking on doors model. But, I'm assuming that did despite it being kind of a crappy experience, probably taught you a lot around sales and marketing and helping, to people understand what it is that you do and why they need your services and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was very helpful for me because I came in from, especially as an Army officer, you're not in sales or anything but, right? So, and I came at from more of the engineering, process driven kind of person, skeptical, show me the data. So I was not very well versed at all in kind of the sales and marketing. So that training was quite good, at least maybe not marketing, but the sales and business development. Asking open-ended questions was a big thing there. So I still rely on that. Instead of asking yes or no questions, I try to ask the open-ended question. So it kind of forced me I did not want to fail. So I just made sure I did the activities, talking to enough people. And that's what I liked about their program. It was the tactics were pretty, one-on-one, but I never felt pressure to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. It's just I had to talk to a lot of people, which I guess maybe I wasn't comfortable with that. But, it's like any sales prospecting, kind of the old-fashioned way anyways, is you talk to a lot of people and you find the people who need what you have, right? So that was helpful. And lo and behold, a lot of people do need help. So if you talk to 1,000 people, you'll get, a handful of, small percent of those people are looking for some advice. And it seems like an odd way to find someone, but some of my best relationships started that way. So who am I to judge?
So out of curiosity, how many people did you talk to on a weekly, monthly, annual basis? Like what's the expectation in order to actually build a business in that more of a cold call, knocking on door type way? Like what's the expectation?
One thing that set them apart, and again, I think they've dialed it back, but I don't know that it's gone completely because I still have some connection in that world. Once upon a time, I think at that firm, it was 1,000 people cumulatively that you needed to meet in person, which is a lot different than doing it, via phone, which I know wirehouses are famous for. So I did like that part. It was harder for people to slam the door in your face compared to just hang the phone up on you or not answer. Back then, I think that was before the advent of the do not call list. But so, 25 people a day was when you were very, very fresh out into the training program, that was the thing. So, 125 people a week for, I don't remember how many weeks, but probably 1,000 people is a good round number of how many strangers you need to at least introduce yourself to. Say, hey, I'm going to open an office here in town. That was the thing. I'm going to open an office in town. How familiar are you with Edward Jones? And, I was in my hometown here in the Dallas area where I went to high school and middle school. So it was a very brief story, but it got some conversations going. And this was in pretty close to the bottom of the market cycle in 2002.
Perfect time.
Yeah. Better to be lucky than good. So once you get clients, everybody, I look probably overly smart compared to reality.
Oh, starting at a low point is always nice for investment returns.
My mom, I remember, I got into the University of Texas MBA program. That was the safe way in her mind. So I remember her asking me, is this really a good time to get into that? It turned out it was, but I didn't know any better. And just pure stubbornness, I guess, out of anything else was one reason I was going to try and make it work. And I like the flexibility, the freedom on a relative basis that they gave a new person, right? So that you had your own office, that hooked me in pretty quick.
And then so during that time is when you're studying for Series 7 and some of the other exams that you needed. So 3 years at Edward Jones, and what was sort of the next transition for you?
So I built, kind of the core of what was now my business, and realized, after a year or two, I actually met people in our industry knocking on doors in a suburb that I was in. So that was kind of convenient. I talked to them instead of just moving on. I'd kind of quiz them and try to be curious. So I did learn things and meet people that were instrumental later in my career and my business that were in the industry, which was kind of a nice side byproduct of all knocking on all those doors. So anyways, as I got to explore the business and the industry a little bit more, I was married but didn't have kids yet. So my wife was a teacher, so she at least had a steady income. And I saw that Edward Jones was a ways off from adopting any advisory models. It was all transaction based, a lot of A-share mutual funds. Which the story was if you held them long enough, the math worked out on the cost. And I was fine with that. But then I realized looking down the road, you either had to be moving stuff around for people, which is not something I was going to do, or you had to be going to get new clients or new money kind of in perpetuity. And that didn't sound very exciting. So As I looked around the industry, Morgan Stanley had a very attractive transition package for someone kind of where I was at the time, which was past that initial stage of, is this person going to survive? Which is a big question, in those days, now probably too, when you're new in the business. So I survived. I wasn't, some huge business, but I had enough that it was clear I should be able to survive. So they made it worth my while to move, 3 years in the business, gave me a nice kind of, the things you hear about, the golden handcuff type money, at least at that time. But it worked out well for me, and because I kind of, thought it through. But anyways, about 80% of my practice moved over there in 2005, and had more tools at my disposal, a little bit bigger brand name to most people, at least at the time. And so that was great, but I had already kind of heard about this independent model out there before I had made that move, and it always tugged at me. So as I got a couple of years into my time at Morgan Stanley, again, there was nothing against Edward Jones other than not having maybe the flexibility and the tools. And then in the Morgan Stanley, there wasn't particularly anything wrong with it. I never felt pressure to do things I wasn't comfortable with. But I did see, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted my life to look like down the road, if I was going to just go build some huge empire, or did I want to have more of what we would call a lifestyle practice. I could see a few things. One, the economics of this independence thing were pretty attractive. Two, I liked making the decisions, who to hire, when to hire, if to hire, where to have my office, what kind of paper to use, what kind of pens to buy, what kind of desk to have. All those things were attractive to me to have some say in or get to make the decision. And then also, at a large firm, it wasn't happening to me at the time, but I could see at some point there might be a number that they wanted me to hit that was above what I really felt I needed to get to in terms of income. And I did not want to, I'm kind of probably overly proactive at times and paranoid. Like I don't want to get close to that line where I'm comfortable with my income and someone else says, we're not comfortable with what you're doing for our income. And so I did not want to dance anywhere near any line. And that's something I continually talk to people today is, if you're going to set goals, you might as well have your goals and not let someone else set your goals for you. And I'm surprised how many people get too close to that line or over that line where they're forced to do something. So that was a big thing to me. I made a move to set up my own practice through an independent broker dealer. In 2009, I'd had our first child. My daughter's now 10, but she was 2.5 at the time. So, it was starting to get real in terms of wanting to have control of my destiny, so to speak.
I love the way you frame that because, you can meet all the minimums, but if you have different expectations than the people that you're making money for, because that's sort of that model, there can be a lot of pressure there and a lot of disjoint that, you're happy with how much money you're making. And you may say, I want to make $150,000 a year. And they say, well, we want you to make 300 because if you make double, they make double. That, those pressures could be, a challenge as you're trying to sort of build out the lifestyle that you want to have, because there's always more money to be made. It just depends on what you're willing to give up to make it.
Exactly. And that happened both at Edward Jones and I think now Morgan Stanley. At Edward Jones, kind of that minimum standard to be left alone has gone up dramatically. And since I left 11, 12 years ago, and that's my understanding at Morgan Stanley, that's continued to get driven north. And so even if that hadn't happened, I don't regret ever one bit making the decision, but it sure makes me feel a little bit better about being quote unquote paranoid, that I didn't make these changes just because, I was a control freak. It was also, being a little bit ahead of the cavalry, so to speak.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons most listeners will know that we have a relationship with TD Ameritrade for the XY Planning Network members. And part of that was no asset minimums, but no asset expectations. That most custodians have this line, this level that you've got to get to. And I understand they need to be profitable. They need to run a profitable business. And so they're sort of drawing a line that says you need to have this much under management by this date. But then if you have a different business model, you may be making, we've got advisors making $100,000 in gross revenue with $1 million under management, which is not how much you're supposed to be making, but it's because we don't only charge AUM, we sort of have planning fees. They may be making good money and just not have the assets. And it's frustrating when someone tells you, no, you need more assets. You're like, I'm happy where things are at. I'm happy where things are going. I'm not changing my business model just to accommodate you. So But one of the things you said was you set up an independent practice at a broker dealer. And I think that this is an area of confusion, especially for younger people that are getting into the industry, is that, we say go independent, have an RIA, and yet some folks will say, I'm an independent broker dealer. So can you talk about why that phrase is actually correct, an independent broker dealer, and sort of how that's different, I guess, from how I would use the term in saying sort of an independent RIA?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and I understand why, but a lot of people, probably including you, it's one step of independence, probably one big step down the independence chain or hierarchy in the arrangement I am now, which technically is a hybrid practice. In other words, carry my securities licenses and my advisory licenses. I have a broker-dealer affiliation and an RIA affiliation. I guess, and that was one reason I had, reached out and said, this might be of use, because I'm guessing there's a lot of people like me 7 to 10, 12 years ago who are at the Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBSs of the world who would love to go independent, but that's such a murky term to some degree. I mean, it's, we can all have our own definition, but the reason I call it independent is because from a day-to-day standpoint, I run the business in terms of staff, what clients I work with, what clients I don't work with. No one pays my rent. No one pays for my staff. No one pays for my licensing. All these fees are passed through to me if they're through the broker dealer, that part of it. So, I learned after I was in the industry, a couple of years, well, wait a minute, this Series 7 thing and the Series 63, which I got at that first firm, really they're just salespeople licenses. And my title, I think, was investment representative on the card. But I was fashioned myself and thought of myself as an advisor. And I did give advice and I acted that way. And I think that's led to whatever level of success, which for me is all that I could ever want in terms of practice I've built. But from a legal standpoint, that was not the case. So I learned that kind of after the fact. And that's when I started going down the path of trying to understand some of this stuff. So I didn't get my Series 65 until I went to Morgan Stanley. So the first 3.5 years, I didn't have a Series 65. So, good news is my experience and observation, if you do the right thing for people and you treat them like you're going to work with them the rest of their life, you can probably do a good job, without all the tools. And that was kind of, I guess, good practice for me those first few years. But in any event, so, I left Morgan Stanley in September of 2009, and I'm now affiliated with the very largest independent broker dealer out there. It's not hard to figure out who that is, but due to my paranoia, I won't use the 3 letters, but because, we'll get to this, I'm sure, but the compliance annoyances are significant when you have that piece. But so anyway, so I had these licenses. I had this business that was not 100% advisory. And so it's kind of a natural fit. And as I would describe it, it's a good way station if someone's trying to get to a fee-only business and they can't see their way forward from a Merrill or Edward Jones or wherever. You can do the exact same business you have now, but not have someone dictating the numbers, where your office is, what you call yourself, within reason, those sorts of things. So the independent broker dealer is, kind of a halfway house, or can be toward, between having a pure RIA business. So I have my securities license that are held with the large broker dealer. I held my advisory license with them the first couple of years after I quote unquote went independent. Then me and a couple colleagues partnered up and we created our own RIA. So we own our own RIA. So we run all our advisory business through that. That broker dealer also has kind of a custody business that has grown significantly because they're smart enough to know they need to have that offering so that people don't break off and everybody go to Schwab or Fidelity or TD. They keep custody, and it's from what I can tell, it's not exactly the highest caliber technology, et cetera, but it's the path of least resistance for me and others that the stuff's already there. So we converted to having our own RIA. As I told clients, it's kind of funny, like everything's the same except if you ever get really upset, want to sue someone, you sue me instead of this other big place, And for my best clients, or for all of my clients, obviously that's tongue in cheek because, they wouldn't be working with me, hopefully, if they were planning to sue me. And that was one of the other kind of differences I pointed out between Morgan Stanley and this independent broker dealer. It was more like, Morgan Stanley has a lot more money than me. So if you're looking to shake someone down, stick around at Morgan Stanley. If you want to come with me, come on. We're going to do the same things with less interference from third parties that don't care about you like I should and do.
So I like this framing. So if I understand this correctly and see if you agree with this, there's sort of we've sort of put everyone in 4 different buckets. First bucket was where you were with Edward Jones, where you are a representative of that firm. You don't even have your Series 65, which means you're not giving investment advice. You were out selling. That's all you do, is you are selling products for that company. You don't own the client relationships. You don't make any decisions. You're an employee, right? So that's sort of that FINRA only employee model. And then you sort of have the next way station, which was sort of transitioning to Merrill Lynch, where you can do both sales and advice. You can get the Series 65, but ultimately you're custodying everything there. They're handling the investments. They're still dictating to you how you operate. You just can do more now because they just offer a wider breadth of services. Sort of phase 3 is you then say, okay, well, I don't need you for all that advising stuff. So I'll sort of get my own RIA, but still affiliate with this broker dealer, and we'll do things under our roof, similar processes and systems, but you sort of own it at that point, and they're sitting in the back handling some of the custody stuff and product transactions. And then sort of the final piece, which is where many people hope to get or plan to get, is breaking away from the broker dealer and just going RIA, which is pure advice, no actual product sales. And that's where you have the RIA, you're operating, you're using an independent custodian, or a third-party custodian like Schwab, TD, Fidelity, Shareholder Service Group, those folks, and then everything runs through you. So did I miss one, or do you feel like those are sort of the 4 buckets?
I think there's a very good framework in terms of the different platforms. And it's nuanced, and I think you were trying to nail the actual platform. But the only thing that I would add on to that is, and I think a lot of people that have been in the industry a long time have done this, and maybe they did it, all in one swoop from step 1 to step 4, is you can kind of do the same or similar type things. It's just not going to be as straightforward. And how you get paid obviously tends to affect what you look at. And so there's no doubt about that. And I tell clients now that if we work together in the transaction-based model, I'll explain, look, I've built a practice, you know how we do things, how I do things. When we're going from the brokerage model where maybe they had A shares, maybe we had C share mutual funds, that, I'll say, look, it's going to be similar, except we're going to make this very transparent and clear that there are no questions about who's paying me. It's always you, itemized, line items, but anyway, so the short version of that is, to a large degree, I feel like I've done the same kind of work along the way, but you always think that as you're going down the path. And then, there are days when I would drop my Series 7 in a heartbeat, like a lot of people have done along that spectrum. But so that's the difference. So the advisory business is between step 3 and 4 that you just described are very similar, except that the broker dealer does either have or feels like they have an obligation to have some oversight, and that makes things more complicated, no doubt, especially from a marketing and blogging and any kind of quote unquote new ways of marketing yourself are going to be much more challenging.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I mean, if I was with any of the independent broker dealers out there and I had 1,000 or 3,000 or 10,000 reps out there doing their own marketing and it wasn't running through me, obviously that's terrifying, which is why I think a lot of them have sort of shut down. Like, no, you can't use social media because that means I have to review every single tweet you send and be sure that it's okay. I have to review every blog post and every podcast and all of that. And I remember we had Jeff Rose on the show very early on, back in episode 6, I think. And he was with LPL, and he said he wrote a blog post that said, "I love Roth IRAs," and they said that you can't say that. And he said, "Well, then I quit." So he went and started his own RIA because he said that if that was the line, then he wasn't going to be able to abide by it, which I'd say has worked out well for him. But yeah, it's interesting because we do talk a lot about going independent, and I don't meet a lot of independent folks or in the RIA space that are like, you know what I want? I want to go work for like Edward Jones or Northwestern Mutual selling insurance. Like, that's my dream, right? Like, it's sort of this interesting thing that everyone sort of is moving down that pipe, that we just described through those phases. There's not a lot of folks going back up it. Part of that could be the fact that, those companies are able to recruit better just because they have size and scale and legacy and a brand name and that sort of thing. So they're sort of bringing in all the advisors, and then advisors pick and choose where they want to be. You may, these different pieces, I guess, each come, again, with their own pros and cons. And making the leap from, I'm an Edward Jones rep to I now own my own RIA is basically starting over. And it sounds like you've sort of found a way to be able to transition clients through it instead of just basically bailing on your entire book of business and relationships and then going and opening your own firm. I mean, is that still doable? Obviously, you did it 10, 12 years ago. Well, not even that, I guess, with the actual move away from Edward Jones. But do you think that's still doable in terms of if, sort of transitioning clients through these various phases on their way to independence?
Yeah, I think so. It changes a little bit with each firm is how they deter you, to be gentle. I think each firm, each office, region, whatever, they're going to have a different approach. One of the kind of my strategic thoughts early on was, it's a lot easier to get under the radar and get out of here without a lot of headaches if I'm fairly small and being newer in the business. That tends to correlate. So not that I would have built some huge business if I'd stayed there, but I figured if I'm going to move, it's easier to move it when it's manageable. And so, my first move was before that little correction we had in 08 and 09, and the other one was after it. So it actually was a similar asset base both times, because I was only, 6 months after the bottom of the market when I kind of struck out to the independent broker dealer. So it could definitely be done. And a lot of it was my probably fear or hesitation about ripping the Band-Aid off too hard. So I admire the people that have done it more one shot, one kill type move. Jeff pretty much did the same thing. He skipped the wirehouse. I think he had the regional firm, I think it was A.G. Edwards way back when. Then he had the independent broker dealer, and then he just stayed with them as a custodian again, because you wouldn't probably pick that if you were starting from scratch. He might not have. We'd have to ask him, but he's obviously done okay, staying there as far as I can tell. So, yeah, I think it could still be done. But if you're building from scratch and you don't have any need for the securities licenses, for example, probably be a whole nother conversation, but if you find use for an annuity with an income guarantee, those have historically only been available in a commission-based environment. Well, luckily that's changing, and that should be a lot different in 2 years, much less 5 years. So those are going to be available in an advisory wrapper, where if you love the idea of having that capability to offer a client, the cost will be stripped out and you'll be able to offer an advisory platform. Well, that's one particular tool that, if you've used it and you want to be able to have it in your toolkit, so to speak, you couldn't do it, right? And, 90% of my revenue comes from recurring revenue, either advisory or, for lack of a better term, C-share like investments, where it's asset based, it's not transaction based. I don't do a ton of life insurance. I tend to prefer that out. I'm not an expert. And, I always joke that term insurance is great. It's so cheap that it's not even worth me selling it, right? Because it's so cheap, there's nothing in it. And that's good, right? For you, it's bad for me.
No one ever sold it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I want to dig into this process just a little bit, because again, this is not a world I've come from. So when an advisor says, hey, I've got this book of business, I've got some annuities and C shares and various things going on, and I'm looking at going independent. We get a ton of questions around, like, what do I do with the trails? What do I do with the existing business? Like, how do I find people that are reputable, that I'm not like turning them over to the insurance sharks that I, used to be or used to work with? And because I don't want them, contacting my client. Like, I want to be able to handle management of all of this. Can you talk me through how to actually transition your book of business, short of just like, okay, sorry, 20% of business and clients, like, you just can't come with me because I'm fee only and can't accept trails, but you have an annuity I sold you and now I can't help you with it. Like, I guess because there's so many pieces with that you have to navigate.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because now as I look at 10% sounds like not a big number, and then until you go, wait a minute, that's this many dollars, right? So I see how people get, because 10%, if you think about growth and simplicity and streamlining, it should be, from a business standpoint, not a big deal, but then you go, it's this many dollars, and that it sounds painful, right? We all know the loss aversion studies and such. Advisors are usually people, so it's tricky. So one of the things I found, in fact, I've been going through this with some of my existing relationships, where, let's say I have kind of a mass affluent client, which it's kind of where my bread and butter is. And let's say they have $500,000 with me, but $450 that's in a rollover IRA, and they've got, $50,000 in a couple smaller IRAs, Roths, whatever it is, smaller accounts. Well, I would have historically not converted those to advisory, doing what I think was a service in not having the meter running on those accounts. Now, they might have A shares they'd pay for once upon a time, but they'd still have lower all-in investment costs generally than if I had an advisory fee on it. With the DOL pending, and of course that's, I guess, up in the air at this point, but it occurred to me it would be a lot easier and straightforward if I could just convert at least IRAs for the time, focusing on those all to advisory. And I was trying to kind of wrestle that decision, and I came up with a solution, which was, I'm just going to tell these people, look, we're going to convert these to advisory, try to explain the nuance of why we're doing this, but we're not going to have, the advisory fee will be zero, right? So I don't have to let go of that relationship and let go of that account because of what you just described. I'm not letting anyone else, if I don't have to, touch those accounts. Not that they would do something wrong, but they might not do it the way I want. They don't have the background. It's not going to be their priority. So I just said, you know what? I don't need the 25 basis points on 10% of someone's money. That's not the point. The point is serving them the way I need to be able to keep their life in mind, hopefully as simple as possible, which is, increasingly difficult no matter what construct you're in. So that was one idea, right? So I just take these smaller accounts, make them zero fee IRAs, and then if a regulator comes and says, why aren't you trading this? I'll say, well, you notice the fee is zero. Or why haven't we rebalanced this? Well, it's a $4,000 account, and you have 400,000 or 4 million over here, whatever the number is. So that was one idea, just keep control, but and again, that's a lot easier in an IRA where you don't have any, if you do sell an A-share type fund and just go to an institutional share or an ETF, it's a lot simpler there. In a non-retirement account, you got to take into consideration other things. So that's one idea. The other idea would be just to, if you're in a large enough network or firm where you have people that you would trust, figure out a way to work something out. I haven't heard of anybody doing that directly, but I think it can be done if you know people well enough and you trust them to do what they said they would do. And then the other way is, I guess that's where one reason I like the idea of, making sure people are aware of this hybrid model is the decision to get away from your employer, the wirehouse or the big regional firm where they kind of quote unquote own you. If you get to this hybrid model where or an independent broker dealer type model, I think you're 80% of the way there to ultimate freedom and fee only. I find, I've been kind of slow at this because nothing's been pressing me, but it's 7.5 years in, and now I'm making that change. It's much more manageable. I don't have the pressure of trying to, make sure my clients aren't harassed by the old firm. It would be much more gradual going from here to the fee only world. It would not be that difficult because I'm not fighting two battles. I'm not fighting to maintain my existing relationships and making the operational changes. And my clients aren't going through all that once either. Now, again, if you can do it right and you're good enough to do it and you're in the right life situation, all at once, then you'll have to do it once. So, I'm not saying that's not the right way, but for a lot of people who they're fearful or they don't want to have a lot of risk. That's kind of how I was and how I am. I didn't want to jeopardize. So hey, everything's going to be the same. We're just going to move this stuff from here to over here. And then, a year later, 3 years later, 7 years later, whatever. That's one way to do it, is just get to this halfway house and then sort all those issues, And then you can find independent advisors that you trust that are maybe on the same platform, and you can, figure out how to at least, view the accounts if you have the right access, which is, that's for each platform to figure out. But it's not that easy, right? Though. But the thing is, there are ways to get from A to C, and I think B is most of the way there, I guess, is kind of the way I view it.
Makes sense. Yeah, because we're kind of talking about two things. One is, how do we actually take care of the client and service them and provide value? And then the other thing is, what the heck do we do on the fee side? Because to your point, you said you've basically adopted a model where you're doing the work and not being paid for it. So if there was a way to transition that account to someone else and you can keep servicing that client and being their comprehensive financial planner, but either no one's getting paid or that other advisor's getting, the small trails that get kicked off of it, it's doable. But like I said, it's so strange to me that you could sell C-share, you could sell an annuity and not just be able to call up the annuity company and say hey, I don't want the money anymore, and they wouldn't be thrilled. But cutting off trails is extremely difficult. And NAPFA, who sort of created the first definition of fee only, used to let you donate trails. So they would say, hey, if you want to go fee only, but you've still got this $500 a quarter coming in from all this random crap, donate it to charity, document it, we'll be good. CFP board has not adopted that philosophy, mainly because I'm sure it's impossible to police. And they've just said no trails. So on the service side, you can keep doing comprehensive financial planning, which will encompass all of their financial life, which can include products that you're managing. It can include products that, someone else sold them. The same way a fee-only advisor can go serve a client and get them an annuity by going to an outside provider. But how do you actually transition trails? Or am I overthinking that?
No. That's the part. I'm not sure there is a way forward just yet, because I built a lot of the annuity stuff that I have done. It was built with a long-term relationship in mind. So it was less money up front, or in some cases, there's always some, I guess, in those things, but with a more of an asset-based trail that's more at the 1%. I remember when I first kind of came around to the idea that I could at least consider those. One of the compensation models was some amount up front, then nothing for a few years, then a 1% trail after, it might have been 4% up front, and then nothing for 4 years, and then 1% a year. So I thought, well, that's 1% a year. And yeah, you get a little bit of up front, but I'm a long-term guy I don't really care about that. And that got me at least comfortable with listening to the spiel of, okay, who might want these? And that happened to be about when the latest generation of these income guarantees came about. But in any event, so they're all built with this 1% model. It's 25 basis points can add up too. But so I've looked at that and said, I don't know how I get there from here, other than I do have two guys that work for me that I can say, look, I'm going to go over here and do this, and our relationship's going to be different, but you know how we use these things, and you're going to make sure we can review these every year to make sure they still make sense, make sure we understand how the income guarantee works, all that jazz. I'm not sure there is. Mutual funds are fairly straightforward because there's another way to do it, right, in advisory. But, again, if capital gains are not a major problem to sell something, which again is a big caveat. So with other things, and I'm not huge into life insurance, but I don't know that people figure out how to pull that apart. There's probably not been a huge demand for it because obviously some of those things are not used what I would call, and most of us would call, the right way or for the right reasons. And so maybe there's not a big demand on that side, and there's not a big demand on the fee-only side to find a solution. So there's probably not there's just not a big market for solving that problem on the demand or the supply side. I have found that if I ever wanted to do more creative outside activities, mainly from a marketing standpoint, like some things I'm doing now, I can't get paid, can't make money, can't use my DBA for my business, because it's got to be completely separate and distinct, which is fine. But I thought there are a few broker dealers that are a little bit more willing to accept, okay, we'll take your trail only stuff. How much risk is there? I'm sure there's some, but how much risk if they're not doing any transactions? They're just passing money. I mean, that's not a bad business model. Just take 10% off the top, take money from this company, and then take it into our bank and send it to me. 10% cut for that is pretty good margin if they can figure it out. So anyways, that would be a big headache though to change. So I'm not sure if it's been cracked. I think that going forward, the idea is we're going to have these vehicles available in an advisory model, just like mutual funds. That soon, you and I'm not even old enough, and I'm older than you, but to remember when the Schwab Marketplace, what are they called? That was kind of a new thing, right? To have mutual funds in an advisory platform for RIAs, that's commonplace now.
Yeah, and that's where, for somebody like me that came into the industry where we had, institutional shares of mutual funds, it makes no sense to me to not have institutional versions of life insurance, right? Like, it's baffling to me that I can get the same mutual fund with or without a load, but I can't get the same insurance policy with or without a load. But you sort of broke it out into three different products, which I want to be sure that listeners out there understand the different, pieces that are out there. So if you have mutual funds, annuities, and life insurance are kind of the three big ones, that maybe all of them that sort of people get hung up on. Mutual funds, if my understanding is, it really is just a rollover or you can transition. It's a tax-free exchange to go from one share class to another. So you can go from a C share to an I share or an institutional share if it's available. If not, then you would have to sell it and buy a new one. But you could cut off those trails if you did sell some of those C shares.
I only have one perspective, one broker, the broker dealer, or I guess our custodian in that case. Yeah, they'll perform that and you probably know better than I do, but I assume that's doable.
Yeah, they're happy to. Yeah, just be sure you say tax-free exchange. not just an exchange, because that causes a it causes a capital gains issue. So then we have annuities and life insurance. Life insurance, I have historically just sent people like go to Low Load Insurance Services or a John Ryan or somebody like that their whole thing is life insurance, and let them become the agent of record. They'll get paid any money that's still coming in off of it. And you just transition your business where you charge a planning fee, whether that's monthly subscription or hourly or assets under management, whatever your fee structure is, but let someone else just sort of administer and be sure the premiums are paid and all that. And you just focus on, does that product still make sense for you inside the comprehensive financial planning process? But annuities, again, seem to be the kicker because one, I mean, it can be a lot of money and it can be sold. I mean, if it has 1% trail coming in, you can sell that. I don't know if it's a 2x sell, because it's recurring revenue, but then the client is paying for the annuity, someone else for 1%, and then they're paying you, which I think is appropriate, but you have to sort of find a way to pitch that to the client that says, hey, this is actually going to cost you a little more because someone else is going to be making this money. I'm going to charge you 1% or a monthly fee directly, but the service model isn't really expanding. I'm just sort of separating myself from this conflict of interest that I already had and already sold you the product, and there's no real conflict now because the product's been sold, right? I don't have any, it doesn't matter. So that's the messy one. So any recommendations for where to look? Like, is that just sort of tapping your network and just sort of thinking through?
Yeah, I think so. I would look for someone who's an expert in that particular vehicle, right? So I do not want to go find someone who's fee only. I hate annuities, would never even go near one. Type of person. I'd want someone who I think is sort of the craftsperson and the subject matter expert even more than I am, right? So that or I need to find someone who's going to be very accommodating and figure out how to make sure I can get the information I need. Because one of the big downsides of those things is obviously they're complex, right? And I try to pride myself in telling clients, look, every year we're going to take a look at this, how this rider works, because one, we need to make sure whatever they explain to us still works the way they explained it, which is not always the case, or there's some other gotcha we have to be careful of. So I need to make sure I can. And I always tell people with a lot of those things, you either turn on the income from it at some point or you get rid of it. There's no reason to just hang on to it because then it's all the bad thing. It's just an expensive, ridiculously expensive mutual fund. That's pointless. So anyways, I would say, yeah, find someone who's got the subject matter expert and or going to be accommodating, who's willing to sign access or some sort of third party information sharing. Yeah, it's tricky. And I would hope eventually the annuity companies get to the point where they could strip out the compensation and somehow wrap it in an advisory setup. That might be a ways off from what I've seen. But yeah, it's kind of tricky. And I think that's the only thing that would prevent me from being fee only tomorrow is, that particular. And if I thought they were terrible, I'd just close them out and, a lot of mine are
move on.
Yeah. We'd just be done with it. It'd be easy.
Yeah, it is a difficult piece. And it's challenging that the annuity companies and insurance companies haven't, created no-load options that fee-only advisors can transact, which, my understanding is partly market demand in this, that in the grand scheme of things, the number of fee-only advisors that can't transact insurance is a very small percentage of the overall number of advisors in the marketplace that can transact that. So it's probably 5 to 10% of advisors are actually full fee-only, according to the, CFP board. It may have gone up a little bit recently, but it is frustrating to not be able to get access to those. And I was always happy to send my business to an insurance expert. And I always used Low Load Insurance Services because they were the experts and I'm not. And the last thing I need to do is try to figure out, even if I could get a no load version, is the MetLife or the Guardian policy better? Because it's not a world I live in every single day. And I'd rather just sort of focus on the client. But it's frustrating that, someone who says, like, I do want to go fee only, I want to be able to use that from a marketing perspective, join organizations like XYPN and NAPFA and be able to list on the CFP board. And folks keep saying, go find a fee only advisor. That for the folks that do want to make that transition, that there is a struggle. But so for the folks that are out there, I guess, what tips do you have when they're evaluating, hey, I do have some of these trails or I have some existing business? Do I just drop it? Do I go this hybrid model? Like you said, don't go A to C, like do a B holdover for a few years. How do you sort of go about making that decision? Part of it is it could be,
obviously you have to look at what you have now because that's, day zero when you make a transition, best judge of what your business will look like on the other side of a move is what do you have now. Then when you're doing that or before you've made the change, you need to look at what are you trying to get to. So if your goal is to be 100% advisory driven or not charge an assets under management fee and charge a monthly subscription, well, this sort of stuff is going to, over time, kind of merge towards a zero impact, right, on your life. So now, if it's 90% of your existing revenue, obviously that's going to be a little difficult. If it's 10%, it's going to go towards zero. Then maybe if you can get by from a lifestyle standpoint on 90% or 80% or whatever you project you would have when you move, then it's worth, kind of phasing it out. That's the thing I would look at it. And so I've been, I guess, a little bit chicken. Both times I've moved, I've said, all right, I'm going to move my existing business the way it is. Tell clients, yes, it's going to be a change, new accounts, all that, but it's everything. I'm going to be here. I'm the same. I'm going to help you get through it. We're going to get everything set up. And that's worked. I see other advisors when they make a transition under similar circumstances, they say, this is the time. I have a partner in one of my businesses that went from an insurance-based broker-dealer, not really independent, sort of semi-independent, but he went and kind of tore the Band-Aid off, basically almost, largely to advisory in the move, right? So he changed where he was doing business and how he was doing business. And I would have been too chicken to do that. I give people the option. When I'm talking to advisors, I say, you can do it either way. Obviously, there's benefits to each. I'm somewhat libertarian when it comes to, here's my opinion or how I did it, but I've seen people do it both ways. So, where you're trying to go is obviously the big thing. If you're going to have 0% of this other stuff, make sure you get compensated for the advice. And obviously, you guys do a good job of helping people how to understand how to do that or get better at it. And if it's 5 or 10%, at this point, if it was 5 or 10% of my income, I would find, it's a decent chunk. It's, like a quarter. I'm happy to have these other vehicles if I want to have them available another way. And I have a couple ideas on how I would do it personally, but it takes some planning and you want to think through all the what ifs. That's one of those times where maybe being the Michael personality is beneficial compared to the Alan personality. You think through all the iterations and at some point you gotta pull out your inner Alan and just do it. You just gotta go. I have both of those people in me. I'm probably more, I've done both. I probably tend towards the Michael, but there are things that, I just want to go and see what happens. And that's a lot more fun. So.
Now, you have a podcast actually geared specifically around this topic called Going Independent. And so can you tell us a little bit about the podcast, the structure? Do you do interviews, that sort of thing, and then how we can find it?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually called How to Go Independent. Very creatively named.
Michael would love that. He loves naming things very practically.
It's, as I told you, I think before we hit record, it's very much a minimum viable product type thing. It's a sideline. It's just me. And what I realized about a year and a half, 2 years ago was we have this network on the hybrid side that we help advisors kind of go independent and set up shop and, come from these big firms. And it's great. I love it. But I realized that was kind of limiting because not everyone that does that is going to do it with us, right? So I'm kind of envious of you guys because you're kind of doing something similar on the fee only side in that, you're giving people the map, the roadmap, the platform, not a direct platform to hold accounts, but you're coordinating all the resources. Obviously, it seems to be working pretty well. So for lack of a better term, that's kind of what we do. But I realized I wanted to kind of talk to more people. And so I get excited about when people make that move. For example, this morning, we had a guy after 15 years at a large firm resign and started his own deal through us, right? So I get fired up. Just that adrenaline, the excitement. I'm excited for him, for his clients, for his family. I don't have to do nearly as much work as he does to get that done, right? So it's on that way. So anyways, How to Go Independent is, you find that in your favorite podcast app or iTunes or howtogoindependent.com. And so I just kind of share the basic frequently asked questions or try to. We have interviews with, just like probably you did, start with people we knew or I knew, telling their story about going independent. The most recent episode actually happens to be an XYPN member, Desmond Henry. He has a great story because he is actually using an independent broker-dealer's corporate RIA, which was fascinating to me because that was another sort of wrinkle that I hadn't thought through or come across. So he's fee only, but he's using someone else's infrastructure, which is different reasons for that. And you can either look at his website or go to that most recent episode. And that was a fascinating little wrinkle. And I actually met him. He was one of the early listeners to my podcast. So, I'm happy to answer questions on, what are the wrinkles between the way I understand, a fee only or starting your own RIA versus using someone else's infrastructure. If you have complete flexibility in your business model, compliance stuff still can be complicated. Because if you're using someone else's compliance, as you alluded to earlier, even if it's, we have about 60 advisors in our network, it's going to be different with us than with a solo. Just, it's easier to take care of yourself we're not lowest common denominator of tens of thousands of people, but, we have limitations because there's 60 of us versus just one of us. So anyways, it's sort of a passion of, I don't know if I should tell the secret, but obviously the best way to get your attention, I think, to be on the podcast is just to say niche, right? So
that was the email you sent me. I have a niche that I want to talk about, and I got you on the show. So
my niche is, and also I can talk about this probably way more than anyone want to listen, and I know you feel that way about what you do. So enjoy what you do, and obviously you guys do a fantastic job, and I know it's a lot of work to serve people the way you do, but keep it up.
Well, thank you, Sean. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your expertise. Again, I find this to be a fascinating topic and something we get a lot of questions around, and that it's helpful for me to just sort of educate myself, which is what 90% of this podcast is me just learning from other people and then, sending people a link to the podcast so I don't actually have to repeat it 1,000 times. So, but thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
If you'd like more time to spend with your clients, First Ascent Asset Management can help. First Ascent builds and manages investment portfolios for independent financial advisors and their clients for a flat fee of $500 per account. This industry-first approach to pricing makes professional investment management affordable for everyone without sacrificing quality. First Ascent's 7-member investment committee includes 5 CFAs, a PhD, and a CFP who collectively bring decades of experience, objectivity, and fresh perspectives. First Ascent offers a variety of portfolios designed to produce solid long-term performance while keeping internal expenses and trading costs low. First Ascent's high-touch service team stands with you as a resource to provide guidance and to make account opening and servicing the accounts easy and hassle-free. They also offer a streamlined technology platform to facilitate proposal generation and paperless account opening. Visit their website at firstascentam.com or give them a call at 720-465-7888. Be sure to join our VIP community at XYPlanningNetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to XYPlanningNetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.